Village people? What? You don't like the Village people? Oh, how about Donna Summer? Oh, gee, that's too bad. We had her waiting off in the wings, too. How about the Bee Gees? Oh, I see. Okay. Well, listen, we took all the disco records that you brought tonight. We got them in a giant box, and we're going to blow them up real good.
Michael, to me, he was the best friend I've ever had on the planet. I remember the first time that I was sitting in a room with just Michael and Bruce, and I was sort of like shocked that I'm in the same room with these guys, and they're just talking to me, and it was like the three of us were, it felt like, felt very special, because I was sitting with the biggest artist in the world and the biggest engineer in the world. I mean, there was no doubts about that. Nobody could do what Bruce could do, you know, and Michael was in love with Bruce. Bruce is an engineer, Michael's the artist. You know, it was wonderful. He's by far the best engineer in the world. I've never seen anybody as good as him. And without Bruce, the albums wouldn't have been those albums. You take music of that quality, and then you have to take the world's most sonically able engineer to make that translate to a record. Do you have any idea how hard it is to take something that's great and make it still be great once you put it on a record? It's almost impossible. There would have been no Thriller, no Bat, none of those albums without Bruce. Not even close.
I was born in Minneapolis, Minnesota. My mother actually sang with the women's chorus of the Minneapolis Symphony Orchestra, and my dad was an organist. So my mother and father decided it would be good for me to learn about music by hearing it on a first-hand basis. So they took me to the Minneapolis Symphony Orchestra rehearsals. I sat all by myself at beautiful big Northrop Auditorium, a gorgeous, huge concert hall. And it was that sound that originally told me what I had to do for the rest of my life. Record of music.
He did a lot of old, very famous big band albums, Ella Fitzgerald, people like that, Sarah Vaughan. He did a lot of these really great sounding recordings from the past.
So one of the techniques that he would do is record things with two mics, and instead of having a mono recording, he would end up with like this kind of manual stereo recording.
You know, when he started out at Universal, they weren't interested in stereo. The record companies didn't want stereo. You know, AM radio was, you know, everything was mono. And at the record companies at the time, no, we don't need that. And it was an expense for more tape, and they didn't want it. But Bruce would always, after the session, or when he could, would make stereo copies of everything.
He believed in it so much that he would pay for the tapes himself. He kind of, thanks to him, finally the labels caved in and knew what the people wanted to hear, and now we have stereo.
The phone rings, and it's Quincy Jones. And at that time, you know, Quincy doesn't drive, so I picked him up, and he has the biggest smile on his face. I said, "What is going on, man?" He said, "Oh, just wait, just wait." Because engineers were a constant uphill climb. He said, "Bruce Swiden's in town, man." He said, "He's at the mix room right now." So I walked in and met him, and when I walked in, I heard what he was doing and was like, this is a new world.
Bruce and Quincy met at Universal Studios in Chicago when working on a Dinah Washington record.
You know, he was doing Count Basie, I think, and Duke Ellington, and, you know, some of the same artists I was working with. And he was just always, you know, every time there was something I really liked that I heard, I'd check it out and have Bruce's name on it. So I was a fan in a sense.
He developed new techniques and technologies along the way, you know, over the course of all the time he spent working with Quincy.
As I backwards engineer and try to figure out how that came about, I still haven't figured out how some of that came about. You know, there's something strange or something different about it, or something just unique to that sound he developed in Chicago.
I got the opportunity to go watch Quincy produce, and when I went in there, it was just the guy who was in the recording booth playing the guitar. Quincy Jones was sitting at the board, and Bruce was at the board, you know, turning the knobs. And I immediately noticed that Bruce has been working with Quincy for so long that he knew exactly what Quincy would want from this guitar player. He had a situation that was rare in the fact that he was working directly with a producer who was all about sound. So he had to learn how to be a musician in a way to get what he had to learn how to interpret Quincy's musicianship to get what Quincy wanted on tapes.
They had worked together for a number of years on different things. But what happened was, I think 1977, Bruce moved to Los Angeles to work with Quincy full time.
I grew up, surrounded by music because of my father and my uncles and aunts. And seeing my uncles perform and make and create music and seeing the joy that they brought to the world, I think that was something that interested me.
They all wanted to do a solo album. I said, guys, are you crazy? That's wrong. If anyone does a solo record, it's your lead singer, Michael. And Michael wanted Quincy, but nobody else wanted Quincy. The record company said, no, he's gonna make a jazz album. I said, no, he is not.
Quincy was the best at helping to see that vision, helping to elevate Michael to higher levels.
Michael's father, Joe, said, why am I going to pay Quincy all that money? I said, Joe, listen to me. If it's a bomb, it doesn't matter. Nobody's going to make a dime. 100% of nothing is still nothing. If it's a hit, which it will be, there's enough money for everybody. Don't be greedy. Let's do it. He agreed. One of the few times he agreed with me. We made Off the Wall.
First song comes up like at noon, and it's gong gong ga-dong, gong 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 ga-gong, just don't stop till you get enough. Well, at the end of that song, Greg Fellingates is on his piano bench, standing up and playing, and I looked at him, and he looked at me, and we realized that we had just recorded a #1 record.
Off the Wall was the biggest record, not only for Michael Jackson, but it was the biggest record at the time that any black person had ever had, of any black artist had ever had up on release. So, and it was a great record. So Michael, of course, thought this should be, album of the year at the Grammys. So when that didn't happen, I'm told by Quincy Jones that instead of going to the parties that happened after the awards show, Michael got in a limo. He went straight home, got out of the car, went into the house, changed his clothes, got in bed, and cried like a baby. That was how disappointed he was that he didn't, win this. But when he woke up that morning, he was smelling blood. So he already knew that he had sold more records than CBS ever expected him to sell. He wanted to sell even more because he knew there was an audience there. They had sold 6 million records. They knew there was an audience there, so that's what he set out to do, to have an even better record and a bigger selling record. And the record company told him it would never happen. Walter Yetnikoff was the president of the label at the time, and he used to privately joke to people, Michael thinks he's gonna sell more than 6 million records. It'll never happen. If we can get 3 million records, we'll be happy.
But it's true. He was upset that it didn't get the recognition that it deserved. He said on the next album, they won't be able to ignore it.
Video games are the latest craze to sweep the country and most of the world, too. Millions of people are addicted to hours of gazing at electronic images on game screens in arcades and in their own homes.
And I remember in the late 70s cruising around areas like Hollywood that had, large spaces that had video games in them.
It was when video games like Pac-Man and stuff became, they started costing $0.25. And when kids were spending, after a half an hour at an arcade, they would be spending several dollars, of their money. This ate into the money they would spend on records.
It was either one of those two things. It was music or it was video games.
It was palpable and noticeable to people in the music business that the disposable income that kids had to spend on entertainment started getting sucked up a lot more by video games.
People were burning disco records too, I believe. It was a really hard time for disco, and I remember my uncle saying that a lot of people were saying disco's dead, it's over, and they were trashing vinyl records and burning them.
A really violent one, which ended up, people burning records in sports stadiums at some nights, there was really good music that was played on the dance floor, so the way we looked at it, but we did a lot of records that were not very good, let's put it that way.
There were issues even within the music industry that were, pulling consumers different ways, like, the disco era, in which many thought music was dead.
I remember driving across country in my VW, and I get right in the middle of the country and I'm listening to the radio, and a DJ comes on and he says, music business is having its worst year ever. Revenues are at an all-time low. And I said, well, here I am, transporting myself to a new location, hoping to be part of this thing that now it's doom and gloom. The industry is failing, it's falling apart. So I said, this has to be an omen. This has to be an omen to me that I'm doing the right thing, that this is the time I'm making the move.
Bruce, the 14th of April, 1982, Quincy Jones, Michael Jackson, and yourself reunited at Westlake Studios to start the project of a new album. It was at the same time that the industry was in its worst moment ever. What do you remember about that day?
Yeah, that's Quincy's. We all walked into Westlake Audio, and Quincy was first in line. He turned around, looked at us all and said, "We are here to save the recorded music industry. Don't forget that."
Around the control room. I look, and on the far side of the room are 4/5 of the band Toto. Standing next to that group of musicians was Paul McCartney. As you look around the room, Quincy Jones was sitting at the producer's desk. Brüs Swidden is in the center of the room, the center of the recording console. On the front side of the console is Michael Jackson. That is the day that I knew I was in the right spot at the right moment on planet Earth to be truly blessed.
I remember it well. It was a big day. The girl is mine with McCartney. with me, Jeff Porcaro, David Page, David Foster, Louis Johnson, JR, and Paul, and Michael. That was like, wow, playing with my first Beatle. That was pretty, and Michael Jackson at the same time. This is going to be incredible.
Everyone was getting to know each other, but it was great camaraderie among everyone. Everybody there was on a mission, and the mission was to succeed beyond anything that succeeded before.
It seems like a lot of pressure, but that was the way that Quincy Jones worked. He would try to give you a mandate. He would try to tell you, this is our goal. This is what we have to do. He would want to put it in everybody's mind. But at the same time, record sales were falling across the country. So the way the music business works, if you have one big record, on the charts that will bring people into the stores, once you go in there to buy that one record, you're going to buy maybe 2 or 3. So that was Quincy's thinking, that if we can get people into the record stores, we can save the music business.
For Quincy to say that puts an awful lot of pressure on everybody. We have to make the record that changes the world. Okay.
Quincy had all kinds of little sayings that he would say, and he would use these things to motivate people. You had to rely on what he called the magic. And so that's what he meant by, these kinds of sayings is we've got to let God walk through the room and things like this. He always left room for the occult or for the magic, so to speak, to take place in music making. And it usually did. It usually did somehow.
Quincy says, music is the only true magic in life. And I think that's true.
Quincy wanted to have Michael be more involved. He asked Michael, write some songs, be more involved in the process.
I'm not looking for one hit and 9 fluff tunes. I want 10 hits. I don't want any wasted space on this album. So that was always the philosophy.
The two, Quincy leading the musical way and Bruce leading the technical way, and it just worked hand in hand and ended up, with the best of the best.
They were brothers, They were brothers from different mothers. They knew each other really well. They trusted each other. They had a language that didn't require words.
And they had their own language between the two of them. They could be talking shit about all of us, we wouldn't know.
And sometimes Quincy'd say, can you put a little seasoning on that percussion?
A little more sauce on that, a little more spit on that. And
we've got to add a little spice. We've got to add a little salt. We've got to add a little sugar or something. A little spit on it, that's, it needs a little garlic, Most of it was in food terms. Those guys like to eat.
It's pretty vague when you say hot sauce. I mean, it could be louder, it could be more reverb, it could be a different effect.
Like if you made a mistake, it was known as an anchovy. Yes, anchovies aren't that popular.
And I quite honestly would have no idea what he was talking about. I just would say, no problem. Like I knew exactly what he was talking about, and I would just change it.
It's easy, I know what he means when he says, put a little garlic salt on the kungas. So it means a little 3K EQ.
It was kind of a completely different type of session. Normally, if you're working with fill in the blank, whatever artist you want to think of, back then, the record company, man, they can walk right in and they can, sit down in the chair and say, let me hear what you got. And I like this song. I don't like that song. It didn't work that way with Michael. We just wouldn't let him in.
Not every artist can do that. But, when you're the biggest artist on the planet, you can do that.
So there was a desire that we're going to tackle this ourselves. Everyone will put their heads together. We can accomplish this, and we don't need outside influence. We don't need outside interference.
You know, we're just going to go ahead and make this record, and we're going to make it as good as we can make it, and we don't want you dealing with the process of making a record because you guys don't really know about making a record.
Very smart, because labels get in the way, and they're a pain in the ass, basically. So you want to keep them out.
We've seen that hundreds, if not thousands of times where record execs who think they know everything, they don't know shit. And, you know, they try to come in and, why's that, what's that? Why is that there? You go, man, you know, get out.
The record company guys think they're their artist. Really? Did you write the songs? Are you going to perform them? And can you clap on 2 and 4? Because we busted a couple guys that couldn't do that. They were deciding on what the hit record was. And you can't even clap on 2 and 4, and you're deciding the fate of someone's career. We found that most amusing. You know, you may be asking the wrong guy this stuff. I know too much. I'd have to kill you all.
Talk about working well under pressure. That's, you know, how many people do you know of that have written the biggest selling music of all time in a taxi cab on the way to the studio? I don't think that happens.
Rod Temperton, bless his soul. When he wrote songs, you talk about methodical. I mean, this guy would spend weeks and weeks and weeks hammering out just the perfect parts to each one of these songs that were massive hits.
Yeah, Rod's band that he worked with, Heatwave, was going to do Starlight, but Rod played the song for Quincy and Michael, and they just went nuts over it. Just crazy. They named it Thriller and called in Vincent Price. Because
the nature of the song, it was kind of a lighthearted camp about B-horror movies, that a special element should really set this off to make it extra special. And that would be to have Vincent Price kind of narrate kind of a rap. So on the taxi ride from Rod Temperton's home to the studio, he knew he had to write something for Vincent Price.
He wrote the lyrics for Thriller in a taxi cab on the way to the studio.
You know, when you look at a product like Thriller, you think, oh, the planning and the prayer that went into this. A lot of it just happened, and this was the magic that Quincy had been talking about. Rod Temperton, was in a taxi when he wrote this.
So when Rod got to the studio, he realized Vincent Price had also just arrived. So while Vincent Price walked in the studio, Rod Temperton snuck down the hallway to the office area, to the copying machine. He said, make some copies of this, quick. So that when Vincent Price was ready to walk out to the studio, there it was ready for him.
Vincent Price was a great, big, tall, real tall. And he'd never used headphones before. And I put some of his voice and some reverb back in the headphones to him, and his eyes got like this. And he just loved it. He was so wonderful to work with.
Bruce would prepare for a session. He would usually do it the night before.
He would have it all laid out. He drew out his map of where everything was going to be, where the musicians were going to sit, where the microphones were going to be, what the microphones were, which ones.
He's got an amazing microphone collection. Yeah, I have a pretty good one also, but I don't think it's as good as Bruce's.
I have 500 mics. That's a lot of microphones. And many of them are one of a kind.
And has recorded, you name it, he's recorded on these various microphones. Billie Holiday, Dinah Washington, Count Basie, Michael Jackson, Frank Sinatra, you name it.
I still have all my original microphones. I have the microphone that Michael did Thriller on.
Something like Thriller, that's just natural instruments and so forth. Most of it was all, pretty much real instruments. So you want to capture that.
Like on the slower songs, he would use like the U47 microphone, which is more the go-to, really expensive, like industry standard microphone at that time. But then a lot of the more up-tempo songs, he would use the SM7, which is not a very expensive microphone. A lot of people wouldn't think he would use it, but it worked. And like Bruce doesn't care. If it works, it works.
You don't do anything casual with a microphone. It's always really serious.
Just 1/16 of an inch difference, let's say on a drum, can make all the difference in the world with your EQ and how it's coming back into the board.
Bruce would be able to build tremendous fields of depth into this music. He would sometimes do it with, for example, the horn players.
We do one pass, 2 passes, so you got both sides, where everybody was happy with it. And then he said, let's do 2 more. You guys go play off the glass, and he'd mic the glass coming back.
And I said, Bruce, this is really a hard part. You're the only one that I'd put that up in front of us. And he goes, I think you're gonna like it.
Every day we were in the studio, we broke the rules.
And I come in, Lukather's there before I am, and he's looking at me and he's laughing. He goes, ha, 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 ha. JR, look what they did to your drums, man.
And so we built this piece of plywood that had a connector on it, and you could put it on the mic stand, and you'd put it between the snare drum and the hi-hat on JR.
And I'm going, shit, there's an Atlas mic stand right between my snare drum mic and the hi-hat cymbals. And it's a barrier, sonically, a sonic barrier to keep the hi-hat out of the snare drum mic. We listen to the song, and I go, okay, it's time to go play the song, and I'm going, I run my right hand into this barrier, and I go, Bruce, can we lower this thing? And he goes, no, learn how to play with it.
And he'd argue with me, but he would not argue with Bruce, and so I guess he had to play a little, it was a little awkward playing it.
And I'm going, oh boy. So it's like, up, I'm like a couple of skipped beats maybe because of this barrier. But if you listen to the sonics, there's everything is just right here in your face.
Quincy said, your recording sounds so different. We have to have a name to describe that process. So we call it the acusonic recording process.
The acusonic process. That was part of the credit that he would get. It's like mixed by Bruce Swiden using the acusonic process. I thought, well, that's pretty cool. Wish I knew what that was, but yeah.
As long as you keep it in mind that it's merely a tool, it's nothing, but it works.
They were at Westlake, and Quincy comes in. He says, hey, Bruce, we got a problem. Bruce says, what? He says, there's some people here from Japan asking about the acusonic recording process. He said, what, they want to learn it? He says, no, they want to buy it. And the process was all in the mind of Bruce. It's like, without Bruce, there is no, process.
All my friends, the other engineers, told me, don't ever bring Bea to the studio. You don't want her to know what goes on. Like what was going on in the music. That's what was going on.
Because being a recording engineer and a mixing engineer, there's a lot of demands on your time. It's very consuming of your entire life when you get on a project and you are working 7 days a week and maybe 10, 12 hours a day.
We would look forward to Bea coming to the studio because she would bring sugar cookies. I always made a joke is when Bea took the lid off the sugar cookies, they elevated and just started floating around the studio. You know, just everybody just grab one.
They all knew Bea. Bea's almost like the studio mom. You know, if she's not there, yeah, Bruce is either going to talk about her or he's got a picture of her.
I'd have a picture of Bea and the dogs and line them up on the console. So once I had that done, I knew I was in my own space. It's been the same always and still is true today. I don't feel that a piece of recorded music is finished until we have both of us listened to it. People don't realize how much of an impact Bea has had on the sound of Thriller. I always, if I'm working on a song or something and have a mix ready, I play it for her. I just watch Bea's face. And if she smiles, no problem.
I bought one of the first synclaviers. I loved it. It came out of Dartmouth, and it's the first sequencer, you know. So they made a vinyl record with the sounds of the instrument. So I sent the album to everybody I thought would enjoy it, and I knew that Michael he was always deep diving, you know. And he calls me a few weeks later, he says, "Man, thank you for this album. I love this album so much." And on the second side, the third cut, it's called Gong. Listen to that. It goes bow, bow, bow. You know, I said, yeah, it's a great sound, man. And he said, well, I just written a new song. It's different. It's a rock and roll song.
He was walking down the street right over here on Balboa, and his car caught on fire. And all he was concerned about was getting this idea down on a tape. It was Beat It.
So we bring the instrument in, and Michael comes in, and I said, okay, I'm bringing up the patch, and I hit the button, and I play it, and he said, that's different. I'm thinking, wait a minute. You're talking about Gong, right? He said, yeah. I play it, that's Gong. He goes, it's different. I look at Bruce, and Bruce is like, all of a sudden Bruce goes, okay, you guys out. Come back in 20 minutes. And so he calls us back in, and he's taken the output of the synclavier and put it through filters. Yada, 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 figures out. And he says, okay, play the synclavier. And he goes, that's it.
Quincy invited me, along with Rod Temperton, to go to Michael's house in Encino for a demo meeting. And that's when I got the world premiere, my private world premiere of Billie Jean, Beat It, and Starting Something. So imagine you're in a room that happens to be in his house, and he plays those demos, and that's what you're listening to for the first time. That did not suck.
We heard the demo of Beat It before I was working on it, and I was like, never heard anything like this from Michael. I said, this is going to be good.
And there was Michael playing 2 and 4 on a drum, hitting a drum, ba, go ba, ba.
Beat It has a huge kick drum sound, and it actually started the speaker on fire. It got so hot from the music.
Those were heady times back then, you know. Those were crazier times, late 70s, early 80s, man. You know, it was on back then.
You can imagine with Thriller, we had all this money invested in this thing and nothing to give the label, nothing. No tapes, no nothing.
I think the pressure that the record company and that the business at large kind of laid on the project, like, you know, daring them to come back with something better. I think it made the music, the record, even more special because they knew that they had to get it right.
It's big, the record business, bigger than movies, bigger than sports, and it's in trouble. Turmoil, confusion. The growth has slowed. Retailers returned records by the millions. Companies folded, merged, fired workers, and a crackdown on counterfeiting began. The record makers began looking for new super sounds. They tried groups like Fleetwood Mac. Their big record, Tusk, last fall, was expected to bring people back to the stores. Well, it didn't work.
Anybody that tells you they know when a song is going to be a hit and how big it's going to be, how many millions it's going to sell, is lying. They're not telling the truth because you can't know that. But there was Billie Jean.
Billie Jean was one that he was especially excited about.
He had some of the parts on the demo already, and the digga-digga-da, that string part, you know, when I heard it, I thought, wow, the groove is good, you know, pretty good. You know, Michael's, even his demo vocal was killer.
And Bruce, I mean, look at when he wanted to start Billie Jean with just the drum, you know.
By having the drum set up on the floor, the sound spread and coupled into the other microphones in the room. And so in order to do it right, we built an 8x8 platform.
And Swideen says, well, I'm going to make that. I don't know how many times he mixed it, but it was like a legendary amount of time.
Almost to 100. And finally, Quincy, he said, boy, that sounds great, but you know what? Let's listen to mix 2. And we did, and mix 2 sounds so great.
Sonically, it's just, that was the magic of working together, is that Bruce would take a drum sound and make it iconic.
I didn't want to give that up. That was part of the image of Billie Jean.
There's nothing, not a single drum sound that is anything close to normal, but it's the coolest track on the planet.
If you listen to Billie Jean and then play it next to an ordinary recording of today, the difference is frightening. Billie Jean just jumps off the record.
I never overslept. And there was one day when I overslept. My alarm didn't go off. And I woke up and I'm like, oh no. And I threw some clothes on, drove to Hollywood as quick as I could. You know, it's like 15 minutes to downbeat. And I walk in the studio, and here's Brüs Swidden setting up microphones. Brüs doesn't set up microphones. That's my job. And he's setting up mics, and he didn't say anything to me. And I said, Brüs, I am so sorry. And he said, we'll talk later, which is worse. And we got through the whole date, and he was laughing and joking with everybody, and he's just being Brüs. And late that night, everyone was gone, and it was just he and I felt horrible. And I didn't say anything. I'm just coiling up my cables, and I'm like, just let's hopefully it's done. And he said, I gotta talk to you. There's something you need to remember. You're working with Michael Jackson. You don't ever do this again. And I said, I understand.
Yes. When you're shooting for the top, you'd better be serious. Vocal dates were very closed. We didn't, Michael had a lot of friends. We didn't have friends come in. We didn't have brothers or family or anybody. So vocals were very intimate. It was not showtime at all. This is a time that Michael could be Michael.
Everyone, like I said, had this feeling of this guy is fragile, because he was. He was fragile in some ways. I mean, in some ways, he was just stronger than anything as well. He came in totally prepared and was there to, for hours and could just, would kill it,
A typical session with Michael is Michael showing up 2 hours early. Let me say that again, showing up 2 hours early to do vocal warm-ups. So nobody told him to do that. He's going to show up with Seth Riggs, and for 2 hours, Seth is going to, play, and Michael's going to sing scales over and over, and he's opening up his voice. He's opening it up.
You all set, Michael?
I'm ready.
Okay, here we go.
Ooh.
Here's something people don't know about Michael Jackson. He always recorded in the dark with no lights. And he said this removes the visual distractions from your mind.
Michael liked the lighting to be very low, and he would love to dance and move when he was singing. It was his energy. It was how he felt the music.
He danced all the time. He could not stand still. So I thought, ooh, I better make this part of this recording. So I mic'd his feet. I set up 2 microphones on Michael's feet.
You could tell Brüs loved nothing more than doing vocals with Michael and leaving in all the noises, things that other engineers would try to suppress and leave out, whether it was Michael dancing around or just the voice, you know, the extra noises he would make with his mouth.
That's part of what Michael did. So he was capturing not only just the voice, but the whole essence.
One of the things my uncle loved about Bruce the best was that he allowed my uncle to do those things. You know, if you go to engineering school, they'll tell you not to move, not to make too much noise, turn your headphones down, it's bleeding. Bruce allowed him to be him. It's a performance, you know, so when I'm singing, you know, I'm sweating, I'm dancing, I'm performing, and Bruce is capturing all this, and you can hear all that, and the listener feels that. That's why it's so great.
It's great, just great. And Michael could not dance or sing out of time or out of rhythm. His rhythm was flawless, like a metronome, just scary good.
There was nobody that could ever surpass him. He created a style that nobody had ever danced before, and now is only imitated by those people that are knowledgeable of him and respect the work that he did and know the kind of dancer that he was. But in the genre of dance that he did, there was nobody that could ever match him. I don't think there will be ever anybody that can match him.
He had a very strong work ethic. Very strong. That's one of the things that Quincy admired about him. You know, he did not care. He would do things over and over and over again to always strive for perfection.
Never had a piece of paper in front of him. Michael absolutely did not believe in the printed page. He always had to sing from memory. Always. I mean, not once or twice, but always.
So usually the song would start with getting the tempo of the music, and usually Bruce would just put up a microphone. Michael would go in and do some beatboxing, and you know, you just it would just start there. So Michael would just go in and, you know, that kind of thing.
Not only could he write songs, he was a great singer in the studio, could sing all his own harmony parts. You never had to use any auto-tune or any other thing on him to make him sound good.
He can lay down 5-part harmonies that are tripled and quadrupled, so it's taking up multiple reels of tape. And it's so precise that the vibratos start to sync up. And that's what you hear on the records.
Not one note was wrong. Sorry to get a little bit emotional, but I do remember the time really well.
Without a doubt, Michael certainly at the top of any list of performers that I have worked with, and that anybody has worked with for that matter.
Never have I worked like that with any other human being, period. Sometimes I get in trouble for this, but I feel it, so I'm not ashamed to say it or afraid to say it, but I compare him in terms of stature as an artist to Leonardo.
Just unbelievable. He's a genius.
Michael, you know, like I say, I always tell this to everyone, he was a musical genius. He respected everybody. I feel like, someone told me this once, and I really kind of believe it's true, is that he was the most bullied person in the world. And I don't think anyone else could have taken that pressure. Somehow he did.
I've been on the phone with him and heard him really start crying
because of, just talking about the perception that certain people had about him, certain people in the world had about him, and he just didn't understand it. He didn't understand how you could outwardly want to, be so pure and want to do so much good and love so strongly and still have people not see it, and still have people believe what they want to believe without knowing you or knowing him, which is something, he understood, and he understood you couldn't change it, but it affected him. It really did affect him deeply, and it hurt him, hurt his feelings, because he loved really deep. He loved the world really deep.
Michael was not only the nicest person in this business that I've ever met in my entire career, but always kind and open and listened to what you had to say as a creative person.
One of the better things about him, he was always making people feel better about themselves. And even if you didn't believe you can do it, he made you feel you could.
He would always do everything possible to make sure that you knew how important it was that you performed for him.
And I love Michael because when he would say, I have an idea, you knew that you were about to climb in his rocket ship.
It's like turning a switch, like a light switch. 1 minute you're playing with your Uncle Michael, and the next minute he turns into Michael Jackson right in front of your eyes, and it's mind-blowing.
This guy had an aura about him that was like no other aura of celebrities that I had ever worked with.
Every time you're around Michael, the energy from him was noticeably different.
Just the effect that he would have walking into a room.
I mean, my God, he was the most known person in the entire globe.
If you Google most famous person in the world, it says Michael Jackson. He did something that nobody else has done, and you're not going to have somebody come along and all of a sudden is going to be greater than that.
I'm extremely lucky to, not just because he's the greatest, entertainer in my mind of all time, and I got to meet somebody like that, but just to the person that he was. He was incredible on stage, and he was even more incredible off.
Michael was like no one else. There's nobody in history that I think is like Michael, or ever will be.
From tomorrow, the film opens all over the country. E.T. is a phenomenon, the biggest thing ever to hit the cinema.
Epic Records is trying to get this Thriller record from Michael Jackson, right? So in the midst of the build-up for this record, they don't have it yet, etc. An opportunity comes up for Michael Jackson to do another project. And for Epic Record, that's probably all that mattered. It's just, we need Thriller from you. We don't care that you want to do another project. It just so happened that this other project was the storybook for E.T., the freaking biggest movie, of the time.
Steven Spielberg came by and said, I want to do an album on E.T., and I want Michael to be the voice of E.T. Michael lit up like a Christmas tree. Oh my God, this was the greatest thing that could possibly be. And I said, Michael, we can't do it.
We were talking about the Thriller album being released on Columbia Epic and the E.T. Storybook album on MCA, so these were competing labels.
Epic Records didn't want a competing record label, MCA, to take their marquee artist and do a project with him, beforehand.
Epic wasn't crazy about the idea of him taking out time on this project, which, was a monumental project, to do E.T.
This was one of the great curves we were thrown collectively as the team in the studio trying to make the record. We knew when the album needed to be released and delivered, and if you time it all out, we thought we had enough time.
And Quincy said, well, we'll use 2 studios and we'll jump from, Studio A to Studio B and we'll just keep jumping back and forth. I said, no, you're gonna mess up the quality of Thriller over this, which is gonna sell 5 copies. Nobody's gonna care, no disrespect to Steven, no disrespect to that amazing movie, but it's a distraction.
And there's a timeline, and they're probably depending on him, to help, make things better for the label overall. Like, what do they care about E.T. and MCA Records? That has nothing to do with, this priority for their marquee artists.
We can't afford a distraction, especially because we put this pressure to deliver this album kind of quickly. And Michael said to me, Fred, you don't understand. I am E.T. Okay, Michael. You win on that one. And we did it.
So we all, departed from working on Thriller for what started out as about a week, but extended to be more than that.
Epic was pissed about the E.T. project because they said to Quincy and Mike, listen, we're already late, and you guys are taking time out to do something else, to do this thing, and this thing could come out before Thriller. They were just upset that they would take the time to do this.
There wasn't a lot of happiness that we were dividing our attention, but not only was the attention that we were doing being divided, but there was a realization from the record company that if Michael is having a release, there could be confusion in the record-buying public, because here are 2 Michael Jackson releases. Oh, which one is the album?
Epic was concerned about another company having the services of Michael, and that had to be dealt with from a legal standpoint. And I'm sure they were concerned, as I was, about a distraction.
This really was an enormous undertaking, and everyone realized this is throwing a wrench in the schedule for Thriller.
And it was Walter Yetnikoff, I think, at the time. And yeah, I understood it. It's tough, but, again, what are you gonna do? It was Michael Jackson. They had to wait. They didn't like it, but they had to wait.
When deadlines are pushed back, it means profit is pushed back. And that's kind of the bottom line. It's kind of like, who's going to make more money faster? Who's going to get theirs out first?
There was the day I remember being in the studio, and Bruce was sitting at the console, and Quincy had just gotten his Billboard magazine. And on the very front cover, there was a banner ad. It said, Michael Jackson's first single, The Girl Is Mine, album release date. And we're sitting in the studio kind of going, wow, we're under a lot of pressure now. Now the world knows to expect this album released on this date. And everybody was kind of shaking their heads going, oh, we don't know how this is going to work out.
I could see is where the stress would come in. They're spending a lot of money. What do you got for me? What's the hit? Record company's all nervous. They're already counting their money before the record comes out after Off the Wall.
Yes, there was pressure. You've got Christmas coming. You've got to get the album out before Christmas.
Epic Records wanted a storybook to come out after Thriller. I don't know what happened behind the scenes, but that's not the way it happened. When they saw that the E.T. storybook was out, it had to just burn them, The lawyers in this case of, Thriller versus E.T. storybook, and when that happens, I can imagine that had to be crazy. Ultimately, Epic sued MCA and they had to pull it. which was, I just feel like that was, it was a pissing match.
And then we made a very good E.T. album, and of course it didn't sell. But the focus was Thriller.
There just was not enough time. We worked very, very long hours. We worked around the clock. I can only say the pressure to finish this album and turn it in by the deadline was very intense.
We knew the record company would be disappointed and maybe not promote the album if they didn't think we had the goods on it.
You're gonna be afraid that you won't get this done, and stay up nights and just do it the best that you possibly can.
For any artist, whether it's a painting, a movie, a song, those are like your babies, and it's hard to let them go. Once you put it on a record, and once that record is for sale, you can't change it anymore.
I think if Michael had his way, they'd probably still be working on Thriller. They would never really get done.
Unfortunately, in the end, it came to a very dramatic head because you can work around the clock. I found my personal limit was if I could get 4 hours of sleep, I could function for the next day.
They mixed it, working all night, 2 studios, just crazy.
I just remember there was a big push at the end.
That was a traumatic night, and it was about 3 o'clock, maybe even 4 o'clock in the morning. Everybody was exhausted, and it was playback time. All the work had been done, all of the recording had been done, all the mixing had been done, all the editing had been done, and now, let's see what we got.
And it was time to play it for the label executives. And I thought to myself, oh boy.
Bruce returned with the lacquer ref to hear exactly how the album was going to sound.
They had a bunch of people there and they were real excited to put it on.
There's like champagne, and they're, our album is done.
The album was mixed, and now they're all in the room listening to it.
We're listening, and I remember Michael sitting behind me, and I'm saying to myself, we missed. We didn't get it. This album, it's not special. It's not going to work. And I didn't want to say anything. I was frozen.
It just didn't have any of the qualities anyone wanted. It didn't have the punch. It didn't have the freshness of sound.
So from what I understand, it didn't have any low end. It didn't have any of the impact that Michael wanted.
And it was like, I think it took their breath away. Boy, the air just went out of their balloon and they were just crushed when they heard it off the record.
It just happened. We missed. We missed on every account.
Everybody on the project said, this is not what we want it to be. This is not the representation of the music fully realized. The result was just not good.
Because once they heard it on the disc all the way through as a whole album, they weren't completely happy with it.
And they stopped pouring the champagne.
It was a room full of very sad, very disappointed people.
They didn't like it. They said, we're not going to put that out. And it was canceled.
And Michael, he was crying real tears.
All of a sudden, we noticed he was gone. And Michael went across the hall to Studio B at Westlake, and We all walked in there, and Michael was sitting in the corner sobbing.
You know, Michael was in the fetal position, crying on the floor when he heard how bad the record sounded.
And it was a disaster. It was I can't overemphasize what a horrible, horrible, sad night that was.
It was not good because of the pressure we were under, the time factor. There were a lot of things that weren't thoroughly considered.
Maybe the distraction of E.T., but clearly the impact of having this deadline right in your face. And we weren't quite ready, so everybody rushed and maybe didn't give it their best.
For there to be any kind of pressure for that would affect how the music is.
We all knew that because of the pressure that we put on ourselves to deliver it before it was ready, caused this thing to happen, and I can't explain this thing.
What we didn't do was we didn't let God walk through the room.
Bruce, of course, was extremely disappointed, being, of course, the recording and mixing engineer. He had just spent an immense number of hours with very little sleep mixing this.
He's aware that you can get used to a bad sound. You know, if you spend a lot of time with one project for months and months and months, you can actually start fooling yourself. Because you know that, even about yourself, and even if you're the best, you kind of need to evaluate actually how you're listening from time to time. Don't assume that you know it all and you figured it all out and whatever you're going to do is great. You're in big trouble if you think that.
You can't do anything with music, you know, except like it or not like it. Quincy knew better than any of the executives, anybody else on the project, he knew and believed in Thriller.
We said, okay, can I say a dirty word? Fuck it. We're going to re-record. We're going to take out 5 songs, and Michael will go and write, and we'll stop the presses.
And the label said, you've already spent all this time and money. Man, we don't want to wait on this record. But Quincy said, fuck it.
Quincy said to the head guy at Epic, are you brain dead? He said, this is the best music that I've ever heard, and you're not going to do it?
The things came to a big loggerhead, and there was there was a big train wreck.
Epic wasn't going to release it. I felt I could somehow make it because there is no bigger recording ever. Never has been and probably never will be.
Bruce was the one who stepped in and said, listen, the only way we can make this right is to just recarve this thing all over again. Let's just remix this thing. Let's just start from track 1 and go through all the tracks and just fix the whole thing. He had been watching these 2 masters at what they do, but now it was time for him to be the master.
It takes a lot of guts to look at Quincy Jones and Michael Jackson and the record company and say,
let me tell you, you guys did the creative part and all that kind of stuff, but sonically and the sound part, this is my thing. Let me take this thing and put it together.
With everything that was on that record, and you're going to go in and change stuff and start messing with that balances are all different. I mean,
It was a big deal, but Quincy said, we have to do it.
I think it was right for Quincy and Bruce fighting like hell with the record company to say, listen, you got to give us time.
So they asked for 9 days to just have a little more time with it.
I don't know how, by whatever means, Bruce Swiden were granted the extra time to go in and properly complete the record.
There was no room for second guessing. You know, you had to go in and you had to just go with your gut on every single decision.
Sometimes you finish a piece of music and you're kind of scratching your head and going, okay, it's not quite there. What's missing? I don't know.
He wants to put all the parts together that can be humanly put together that are great. But then you have to allow for the universe to take place.
There are these moments. I mean, you kind of almost have to wait for something to happen because it's actually bigger than you.
Bruce, I know, slept under the console, wrapped himself in a packing blanket, and he slept there, and he didn't even want to drive to the hotel room in town that he had.
You have to be willing to believe that there is a higher power involved in making something happen.
Sometimes, you know, that kind of connection with whatever it is that's more powerful than you, and I'm not even saying God or anything like that, there's something, some kind of communication, some kind of thing that you can get in touch with that really is something that you don't really almost have control of. It just occurs.
It's when something magical steps in and no one can describe it. You know, no one knows what it is or how things happen. It just happens, and it's perfect.
As a youngster, as a kid, what really made me excited at the Minneapolis Symphony Orchestra rehearsals was that I could hear one note of an instrument and I saw a color right away. You know what that is? Sonic fantasy. Close your eyes and listen to the instruments playing, a melody, harmonies, and so on. And this creates an image in your mind that otherwise would not be there.
Bruce started to use the studio as if it was an instrument or an effect or a tool, and started to using the studio to make it compositional, to start messing with the sound and bending the sound and turning things backwards and making reverb and making things that don't necessarily happen in nature.
Everything comes alive, and it's like, wow. It can be a guitar part, it can be turning something up, it can be turning something down.
It's almost like cheating, though. If I don't see those colors, I know something's wrong.
He was able to create this thing that he imagined, which is the sonic fantasy.
I could create images that began in my mind. That the only place where they could start would be my imagination.
Hearing about this legendary 9 days, Quincy has talked about it like it was walking through the valley of death, because, you know, these 9 days made or broke this record.
It was Bruce and what was inside Bruce to make him make that and mold that record.
Music was, it kind of a visual to him. You could see what he is hearing.
That to me is an amazing gift to have, because when you're constructing the picture and you're constructing the landscape or the soundscape, all those things combine so that you know how to make the most of everything available to you.
Drums and the cymbals were a color, guitars and everything, and it was very visual the way he did it.
It was observing the sound and experiencing the sound that was being created.
It was a way for him to be able to blend the music better by blending visually the colors.
And that sonic fantasy. Yeah, let's create something that doesn't really exist in the world. Let's make something that's more exciting and more beautiful and more colorful and fills the room and makes you feel something more intensely than you've ever felt.
At certain points, music can actually become spiritual. And I don't mean that in a vague way. I mean, a Thriller, from a musical standpoint, is full of greatness beyond belief. So you can call that almost like something spiritual, because nothing's ever been done that's better.
Just when you think this is tremendously big, this is huge, it would get bigger.
Sonic fantasy is what makes certain recordings better than others.
Bruce said to me, I want you to listen to this, Matt. And he played what he had as, at that time, it was awe-inspiring to hear what Bruce had created sonically in terms of the picture, of the depth. It was like, yes, this is the real deal. This is going to be the real record. We know these sounds that are coming out of the speaker now are just energetic. They've got that spark of magic happening in them.
No, I'm not a religious guy really or anything, but I can understand. Once we put that thing out there, Thriller, the results were just astonishing.
It raised the bar. Thriller raised the bar for everybody. Everybody that heard that, every engineer that heard that record said, wow, that's what I got to do. That's what I got to aim for, to get something as good as that.
I remember the sound of it as much as anything. I mean, Off the Wall sounds great to this day, and this is another level of sonic. And it's Bruce. I mean, it's really Bruce.
It was definitely different from any music that had come out at that time.
We needed something. We needed something to get people back in the retail stores. And Thriller did that. I mean, people wanted to go in and buy Thriller. And as a rule, when people go in to buy one thing, you don't go into a store and buy just one thing. Once you got into the record store, I need Thriller. Oh, but I also need Aerosmith. Oh, I want that new Who album that I need to replace. So you go in there and, you know, they saved the record business with that record.
You put Quincy together with Bruce and Michael and you get Thriller. And you take any one of those three components away from it, you're not going to have Thriller.
Bruce, Quincy, and Michael, they were breathing as one up through so much of that.
Here we are 40 years later, and it still holds up. And it's still, the sounds still hold up. And it's not like you're listening to it and go, oh yeah, that's the way the drum sounds were in the 80s. You know, or those were the sounds that were fashionable then. No, it still holds up now. And those songs still hold up now.
Michael and Quincy created the notes, the psalms, and what I did was I made it sound like it does. And for that, I will forever be proud, you know, and I think it's changed everything.
Your music can be no more or no less than who you are as a person. It can't be. It just means all your life experiences and all the facets of your personality come out in your music, you know, in the music that he recorded. So he'll never get the credit he deserves, but it's just the way it is. I'm not thinking, it doesn't bother me. I've made peace with that, and everybody that knows who did what and who, you know, and what their contribution was and how invaluable it was.
After Bruce Swiden, we knew that the engineer was indispensable. You could have all the great musicians in the world. You could have a great producer. But if you didn't have a knowledgeable ear, an expert, an almost godlike engineer, silently putting this stuff together, what did you have? You have nothing.
The more we worked with Bruce, we realized that he was just the best ever. And I rarely say that. Bruce is just the best ever.
I had something to say artistically and musically. And my mom and dad and Bea believed in me. And I think, how could I lose? You can't.